consistent with our statutory and Florida Administrative Code requirements. The 8th edition of the Florida Building Code is based on the previous edition, the 7th edition of the Florida Building Code, with code provisions brought in from the 2021 International Building Code. We also want to adopt Appendix Q, which are the construction regulations for tiny houses. Tiny houses are defined as 400 square feet or less, and this is if the council decides that they want to start having a tiny houses communities or anything, we have built in the construction regulations for that. These, like I said, are just really for tiny houses. We want to clarify permit expiration timelines. We're allowing for inspection service reports from third parties, clarifying the required inspections for a pool, because of course pool safety is a huge thing here in Florida, and we want to make sure all of them are safe. And we are going to remove some redundant electrical requirements. We're also doing some relief from permitting on small projects. We're clarifying when a building permit is needed for small projects or when a zoning permit is needed. We don't require building plans review for small buildings, accessory structures at residential properties that are 120 square feet or less for the use of the residents, sheds, pergolas, gazebos, things like that. We want to let the homeowners be able to have those things. However, they're still subject to the zoning regulations and, if applicable, the floodplain. We also want to do some amendments to the exterior lighting standards. We're adding some definitions that add new technologies, address new technologies. We're removing outdated definitions addressing old technologies, adding and modifying provisions to incorporate the new technologies and standards. We also have addressed a potential conflict with trees. And in this instance, the trees win. We actually have a provision that allows for you to take in the location of trees in your light pole spacing. And adjust the regulations to match Orange County's modern business operations. Now the approval process. We have taken this to the Building Code Board of Adjustments and Appeals. They have reviewed it and recommended it on February 9th. We have gone to the local planning agency, and they have verified compliance with the Orange County Comprehensive Plan on February 15th. We also had it reviewed by several of our industry groups here in Central Florida. And in summary, this adopts the latest edition of the Florida Building Code, clarifies some administrative language, adds a resident-friendly approach to permit exemptions, and updates our exterior lighting standards. Our requested action: make a finding consistent with the Orange County Comprehensive Plan and adopt the proposed ordinance amendment to Chapter 9, Building and Construction Regulations, including adoption of the 8th edition of the Florida Building Code, and make a finding of consistency with the Orange County Comprehensive Plan and adopt the proposed ordinance amendment to Chapter 9, Building and Construction Regulations, Article 16, Exterior Lighting Standards.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. He's gone through this fairly well. Another administrative item, but we will open it up for any public comment. Do we have any members of the public present who wish to be heard on this item?
No speakers for this item, Mayor.
All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved, Uribe. Second, Wilson.
We do have a motion and a second. Commissioner Bonilla.
Yeah, I just had one question. Were there any comments from the BZA or PZC?
No, ma'am. They both groups found it to be consistent and moved it forward.
Okay, no comments. All right, thank you.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Uribe, second by Commissioner Scott. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes, and it is unanimous. With that, we'll move to work session agenda item. We're going to ask Ms. Tanya Hill, our relatively new Director of the Planning, Environmental, and Development Services Department, to come forward. She'll be introducing this presentation regarding the Vision 2050 and Orange Code update. No specific action is being requested today. This is to provide an update and briefing to the board. And with that, Ms. Wilson, you are recognized.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening to the commissioners. I am Tanya Wilson, the PEDS Director, and I'm here to provide an overview of Vision 2050 and Orange Code. The last time an action was taken on Vision 2050, you'll recall, was July of 2023. So we put together a series of sessions. This will be the first of 3 sessions that you'll be hearing from staff to provide some update and overview. One colleague put it right in saying that this is really our roadmap for landing the plane, just giving some guidance as to how we intend to complete this process in the fall of this year. If we could turn to slide 1, begin the presentation. All right, so you'll be hearing some background today. This will be a team effort. As a part of the presentation, you'll be hearing from, thank you, Whitney Evers will be doing a deep dive of plan developments, just to unpack that topic, that discussion for the board to provide some clarity and then seeking some policy direction. You'll also be hearing from our zoning staff. You'll be hearing from Taylor. Taylor Jones will be giving a discussion on the overview, the overlay districts, just to give some clarity in that area as well, on that special district. You'll be hearing from Olin Hill regarding the Live Local Act. How does that impact Vision 2050 and Orange Code? And then lastly, you'll be hearing from Alberto Vargas. He'll be talking about the public outreach process. Of course, because it's a comprehensive plan, it's intended to have quite a bit of public engagement. So we'll be talking about how we've engaged the public and brought them along in this process thus far. And then finally, we'll wrap up with the next steps. How do we get to the finish line with this mammoth of a process? So we'll be wrapping up with that discussion on what that will look like, some of the outstanding items, really seeking policy direction from this board where some of those pending matters are concerned. So we're going to go ahead and get you through. I know it's late in the evening, but we'll get you through the presentation. So again, the last time the board looked at this item was last year, July of 2023. Since then, the packet was transmitted to the State Department of Community Affairs. So they did look at this, Department of Commerce, I'm sorry. So they did look at the transmittal packet from the county. And what's typically issued is an ORC report. The state looked at the comprehensive plan and deemed it sufficient. In fact, the letter that was received indicates that there's no objection, there's no recommendation, and there are no comments that were issued by the state. The comprehensive plan was found to be in compliance. So that's the good news from the state. They've taken a look at the entire document, deemed it sufficient and compliant with Chapter 163 of Florida statutes. With that, we also received an extension, a time extension, 270 additional days given to the county in which to complete the comprehensive plan, and also we're going to be concurrently working on Orange Code. It does seem like a lot of time, but certainly there are a lot of moving parts that go along with that. So we recognize that we do need to have a group effort, a team effort, in order to meet that deadline that's been issued by the state. And again, we have an extension. The question may be asked right now, with that extension, can we miss our deadline? Unequivocally, the state has made it clear, if deadlines are missed on an air packet, there are penalties associated with that. So, of course, if the penalties associated with that, what is that penalty? The county would not be able to file any land use plan amendments if it has a comprehensive plan that's found to be insufficient, if it has a comprehensive plan that's found to be non-compliant. So, from our team, every effort will be made to meet that deadline, recognizing that we want to remain in compliance and not have any penalties applied. So why exactly are we going through this process? The question may be asked. This is a lot of work that's been done for many years. Simply put, state law requires it. Every 7 years, the comprehensive plan has to be updated. And state law also says in Chapter 163, once the comprehensive plan is updated, the zoning code subsequently has to be amended to make sure that there's consistency between the two documents. So right now, we're working on Vision 2050, but you also recognize that we're working on Orange Code at the same time. That's not coincidental. That's intentional to make sure that both documents speak to each other, and the intent for growth management and sustainable development in the county is met with collaboration between the two documents. So what did we hear during the process? Hundreds of surveys were collected. And just a snippet we're sharing here of what we heard from the public. What are they looking for in these documents? We heard consistently the message of an increased neighborhood livability. There was an emphasis on preserving those rural sensitive areas. There was a lot of discussion about protecting the neighborhoods. And then lastly, an intentional focus on activation of those target areas. How do we create infill development in the places that they're intended and not in places that we're trying to protect or preserve? So you'll see that messaging that's brought throughout Vision 2050 and also echoed in Orange Code. How do we become intentional in our growth management practices and not have haphazard type of development? We also heard a lot of conversation about affordable housing, housing availability, housing choice. That was echoed very clearly throughout the surveys that were administered. We heard again, and recently we heard it at the last meeting, this idea of aligning infrastructure, public infrastructure with private investment. When development comes on board, how do we assess rightly at the macro level the impact that it will have across the county, as well as on the micro level for each development that comes in? How do we make sure that there's adequate public infrastructure to support these developments? Again, we heard comments about multimodal transportation. You hear, if you build it, they will come, but we want to make sure that there is a strategy in place to move the people, whether it's bicycle or pedestrian paths or mass transit. How do we make sure that we have multimodal transportation that's considered intentionally a part of these developments? And then we heard again the messaging of sustainable development. We're not just building developments for today's population. Vision 2050 is intentional in thinking of the long view. In the next 30 years, how do we make sure that we have communities that are rightly built, not just for us, but for our children and our children's children? So we're intentional about making sure that this plan echoes the theme of sustainable development, not just building for today, but building for a community that will be thriving and surviving tomorrow. And then lastly, one of the things that we heard on the economic development side was the idea of streamlining the development review process, particularly from the developers. How do we make sure that the code is transparent? How do we make sure that when development review applications are reviewed, that we have a level of clarity and a level of certainty in terms of reviews that are being brought before the board or things that are reviewed administratively? So we have the three-pronged focus. The state asked and required that these documents be updated, so we're maintaining compliance. The community gave us a very clear roadmap in terms of what they're looking for. And then lastly, the development community asked for clarity and transparency in the process. So we're hoping to achieve that as a part of the update process that's underway. So what's our approach? Given what we've heard from the public, given the feedback that we've received thus far, the approach is to ensure that we have documents that increase efficiency in the land use and zoning processes. We're looking to streamline the standards when development review is underway. We're looking for consistency and clarity. Oftentimes you may have duplications in the code, or you have things that are silent in definitions where it's left now to subjective thinking. How do we make sure that we say what we mean and we get in development what we intend to have? And then lastly, you'll hear a lot from staff about the idea of context sensitivity. How do we build places and put things in their proper context so that we have not just cookie cutter type of developments, but we have places that are suitable to the geography and the landscape that they're being built in. And if done right, our intent at the end of the process is to really create a blueprint for sustainable growth, to have places that are environmentally friendly, to create standards, green standards and standards that are suitable for the places that are being constructed. We're looking to create compact, interconnected, walkable neighborhoods, not things that are detached or things that look like they've leapfrogged over each other, but things that have a system of connectivity between roads, buildings, people, and cars. creating affordable housing opportunities. If planned right, we should have housing choices for all. The idea is that we should have a spectrum of housing types and opportunities for the different spectrums within our market. And then lastly, looking to create neighborhoods that preserve or recapture that sense of place. When you're in Orange County, you should know, aha, there's something different about the development here. There's a level of intentionality in the types of development that we have. This, I think, is probably one of the most vivid images that were created to really convey the message of this concurrent review process that we have. On the top, you'll see that there's an image ranging from natural areas, rural areas, suburban, general, center, core, and you'll hear the conversations about place types. It's not something that you currently have in your code. That's probably one of the biggest changes that you'll see in Vision 2050, switching from the old comprehensive plan that you had with designations, the traditional designations. This one is very vivid in terms of the place types. You'll see a range of very low density types of open space areas, natural areas, ranging and increasing in density and intensity all the way up to your centers and cores. And then it's paired with transects in Orange Code, ranging from T1 all the way to T6, where there's a level of intentionality between your designations and the place types and the types of appropriate densities that you're now aligning with these places. So what is staff doing? I mentioned before that we have a 270-day extension. It shouldn't be thought that this is so much time and we have an opportunity to delay the conversations. We see and recognize an urgency to make sure that we're looking at some of these important factors that are going into the update of the code, so we don't lose valuable time, whether it's looking at the public infrastructure impacts, whether it's looking at the PD districts and other things. So we're clarifying standards. We're meeting every week. Zoning and planning staff is working effortlessly with our consultant to make sure that these salient areas are touched. So we're looking at site and building standards, creating clear standards regarding redevelopment, looking at simplifying and consolidating uses, as I mentioned before, making sure you don't have duplication and unnecessary things in the code, incorporating explanatory graphics. You'll see a lot more graphics in this version of your code as opposed to the old code that we had. And providing, again, context-based standards for local street types in new development. And in terms of the related activities, we have quite a bit of training going on internally amongst our staff, making sure that once the documents are adopted, we can translate that information to the public. If we know it well, we can explain it well to the public. So it's not lost on us to make sure that internally we're preparing for the action that's going to be happening once this document is adopted and made available to the public. And then again, there's ongoing development stress testing. You know, we're having those conversations with the development community. We're having those huddles to make sure that the things are being proposed, that they're market friendly, they're practical, they're things that are realistic, and we're not creating scenarios that cannot be adopted or applied in the real world. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney Evers, that's going to be having a discussion on plan developments.
Whitney, you've been here all day long, it seems like.
I'm completing my hat trick of presentations to you all this afternoon. So now I'm going to talk to you about existing plan developments. The map that's on your screen is one that you've probably seen before. This shows all of the PDs in Orange County. There's approximately 650 of them. 470 of those, roughly, are within the urban service area, which means almost 200 of them are not. So approximately 40% of the unincorporated area in Orange County is within a PD right now. And I tell you that because this is obviously an important conversation. Staff has had countless conversations internally about this, how we're going to handle these. This was actually the main topic of a development stakeholders meeting in February this year. And ultimately, what it came down to for staff was, do we exempt them or don't we? And as part of that conversation, we started talking about various issues. One, can we legally require PDs to comply with Orange Code? And if we do, how do we handle vested rights for those folks that are already in the process, that already have approvals, that have already spent money on that? how do we handle the existing conditions of approval? As you know, PDs come to you frequently with a long list of conditions of approval. Some of them are standard conditions, some of them are specific to that project or that property, the physicality of that property. How do we deal with those moving forward? And what are the legal implications if we try to require folks to comply with Orange Code? After that conversation, we started talking about, well, can we encourage folks to comply with Orange Code? Anyone with an existing PD, can we encourage that? There are pros and cons to each of those approaches, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those. In terms of the pros and cons for requiring PDs to convert to Orange Code, obviously the biggest pro is that you're speeding up that transition to Orange Code. You're speeding up the transition to the transects within those targeted areas. Unfortunately, the list of cons for this one came out a bit longer. Specifically, we're concerned about the liability, the potential for liability to the county. Under Florida law, we would have to create a vested rights ordinance because this is going to be a new process. And in order for us to require folks to follow this process moving forward, we have to build in that capacity for anyone who was in the pipeline. So we'd have to come up with a new ordinance for that. In order to do that, we talked about having a time frame within that ordinance because ultimately we wanted folks to comply with Orange Code. So if we do this vested rights ordinance, let's put a hard period of time within which you'd have to apply. We initially talked about 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Whatever that was, we would have had to have notified every PD owner of what that deadline was. We have a lot of PDs in Orange County, as you saw. Frequently, as you know, those PDs are not owned by one individual or one company. We actually have a lot of owners in Orange County of PDs who are national or international corporations. Some of them are real estate investment trusts. Many of them may not be paying attention to what's happening here at the local level. And so the problem with that is, what if those owners miss whatever deadline we create in that vested rights ordinance? And then they're forced to comply with Orange Code. They may end up being in limbo if they can't comply because of some feature of their property, or they just don't want to comply at that point. They may have had this on their books for years and assume they could build this out. And so that implicates private property rights. And so that was why we had some concerns about the liability for the county here. Also, it would complicate staff review. Again, if you have multiple owners, you've got maybe portions of PDs that are trying to come into Orange Code or that we're trying to force to come into Orange Code versus the entire PD. How do we deal with the various owners? What do we do with those conditions of approval? Again, how do we move those forward? If we force folks to go into Orange Code and determine that there is a condition of approval that we think needs to stay with that property for whatever reason, we then could be looking at the potential for a contract zoning argument, and we don't want that either. Orange County has some history with that. We don't want to go back to that. Not to mention, if we created the new vested rights ordinance, we know from past circumstances when we've had similar changes in the code or similar process changes and we've created a process that allows applicants to come in and apply for vesting, we end up getting a voluminous ton of applications. I mean, there have been times in our office where we've actually had to hire out some additional paralegals just to go through those. So we know that it would be a heavy lift for staff if we were to do that. So moving on to the pros and cons of encouraging PDs to convert to Orange Code. Well, the pros, obviously, this reduces the potential liability for the county. It eliminates that additional vested rights ordinance and that large volume of applications. It helps to protect those private property rights because you're then allowing applicants to come in and convert to Orange Code, and they would choose that path. We wouldn't be forcing them to go through that path. That allows for a more predictable method of review for both staff and the development community. And of course, the con is you're having a slower transition to Orange Code. But ultimately, because of all of those, staff is recommending that we encourage PDs to comply with Orange Code and not require them to do that. So here's what we thought that would look like. Moving forward, once Orange Code is adopted, new PDs would be created except where our code requires it. Think Avalon Park, Horizon West, Innovation Way areas. If you have an approved PD at that point, and you have an approved land use plan on or before the adoption date of Orange Code, you get to develop in accordance with that land use plan, in accordance with the PD regulations that were in effect when your land use plan was approved, and in accordance with your future land use densities and intensities at the time your land use plan was approved, with one exception. And that is that we are proposing that we prohibit any increases in entitlements after a year from adoption of Orange Code. This does a few things. One, it kind of locks in those PDs at that point. We don't want them to continue to grow. While we may recognize that we can't force them to comply with Orange Code, we don't want them to continue to expand their entitlements. Two, a lot of the times when we have a new requirement in our code like this, frequently what we hear from the development community is, well, if you force us to do it now, you're impairing existing contracts. And so this gives the development community a year for any of those contracts that might be out there that are contingent on getting increased entitlements to finish that up. We think that's enough time, but obviously if the board wants to extend that or shorten that, we can look at that as well. And then we're giving them a year to get that actually approved. So this would, again, lock in the PDs for whatever those entitlements are. It would also, by requiring them to comply with their future land use densities and intensities in effect on the date of that land use plan approval, it prohibits someone from both keeping your PD and then taking advantage of the increased densities under Orange Code. So lastly, we are providing the Orange Code opt-in provision. So any owner of all or a portion of a PD may choose to develop that PD in accordance with Orange Code. However, you would have to go through a rezoning from PD to whatever your appropriate transect is, and that would require a review by both DRC and PZC, similar to what we do now. If you've got someone who's proposing to convert just a portion of a PD, then staff and DRC would need to review the impact of pulling that portion out of the PD on the remaining PD. So for example, if you are trying to pull out a parcel that may have the only access, or it has the open space, or it has a lift station on it, staff needs to look at that and make sure you're not detrimentally impacting the remainder of the PD if you pull that out. And then lastly would be the analysis of any conditions of approval. That concludes my portion. Unless you have any questions on that, I will turn it over to Taylor.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking to you today about overlay districts and how they translate to Orange Code. So just as a general overview, the county has a variety of overlay districts. Overlay districts are small geographic areas where, in addition to the normal zoning code applying, there's additional rules in there. So they're kind of rules on top of the normal rules. And the overlay districts fall into one of three categories. They are either use prohibition overlays, so within the overlay, certain uses are prohibited. They regulate the sign standards, so in that overlay, there's certain sign standards that apply that are above and beyond the normal sign standards, or they have special design standards. And those are currently found in either Chapter 38 or, in this case of the sign ones, in Chapter 31.5. So the first kind of overlay district we have are the overlays that are use prohibition overlays. We have 4 of those. You can see on the map. They generally kind of run along both sides of these large arterial roads within the county or where they intersect. We're not too clever with the names. As you can see, the names of all the overlays are basically the name of the road they're on. And the Pine Hills overlay is on Silver Star and Pine Hills Road. So those overlays, within those overlays, those uses you see on the right are all prohibited. Those are the general nuisance uses, fortune tellers, bottle clubs, flea markets. So within those overlays, in commercial districts where the use might otherwise be allowed in the zoning district, they're actually prohibited. So if you're in that overlay, you can't do those uses. Second kind of overlay district we have are signage standard overlays. So within these overlays, there's certain sign codes that apply. Generally, they do one of two things. They either prohibit or limit certain types of signs. It's usually pole signs, billboards, or electronic signs. Or they kind of establish a separate sign code that's a little more strict on how big signs can be or how many signs you can have. You can see there's a little bit of overlap. The South Orange and the Conway-Hoffner have a little bit of the same. And the biggest one is the tourist commercial overlay. So that overlay regulates the signage on I-Drive and near I-Drive. And so just to kind of recap those specific ones, we have some overlays that all they do is prohibit certain signs. So those 3 overlays right there, it's normal sign code except these signs are prohibited within them. And then these other overlay districts kind of have their own sign standards within them. You'll note the Convention Center Sign District, that serves one specific purpose. It regulates the signage at the Convention Center. And then the Orange Blossom Trail overlay, that is specific to the existing billboards on OBT from about I-4 down to the 528. It regulates those and has certain rules they have to follow. And then the third kind of overlay district we have are the special design standard overlays. And there's some overlap between the sign ones and these ones. These kind of run the gamut on what they regulate. Generally, it's building height and size, landscaping. In some cases, it's architecture. In some cases, it's just laying out a specific kind of processes that have to go through for development. And so with these, I'll try to give you a little more context to each one. So that West State Road 50 overlay, that regulates some properties that kind of lie pretty much all around the city of Winter Garden on West State Road 50. You can see the things it regulates: building placement, landscaping, trying to match what city of Winter Garden has. The Four Corners Community Overlay, very specific to the properties at the intersection of Conroy Windermere Road and Apopka Vineland Road, and very specific to what it regulates: building square footage and building height and placement. The Lake Willis Overlay is on Lake Willis, kind of near the tourist district. It exists basically to protect some existing residential that's surrounded by commercial, regulates building height, landscaping, buffering. Lake Avalon Rural Settlement, that commercial design overlay, it only applies if somebody wanted to do commercial in that specific rural settlement. So if they wanted to do commercial, they would have to follow the steps in that overlay. It regulates what you have to go through, PD rezoning, and then as part of that, regulates all these other things. Buena Vista North, an area that has a lot of regulations for architecture, building height, placement, landscaping, kind of has its own code. And then we have TOD overlays that surround our Sunrail stations. So these overlays are kind of unique. There's no real specific binding regulations or requirements code-wise. It does lay out a process, and it lays out some general goals of the TOD overlay and has a pre-application process that's required so that staff can kind of relay these goals, but it doesn't have any hard and fast requirements like a lot of these other overlays do. So strategies for the overlays. So for those first overlays we saw, the use prohibition overlays, we're proposing to just keep those as is. So keep those status quo with Orange Code. So the overlays will stay exactly where they are, and the uses that are prohibited inside those overlays now will continue to be prohibited. For the signage standard overlays, the second ones, there's a little bit more evaluation staff needs to do. So as part of Orange Code, we're getting new sign regulations. It's not really reinventing the wheel sign code-wise, but it is something we have to evaluate. So we're getting some different standards that the overlays may already address them. And so we have to kind of see what redundancies are there. So there may be no need to keep the overlays if our new Orange Code sign code standards are updating them. But where they needed, we need to merge them into the current code. And then the overlays that we know are going to stay, we certainly want to keep the convention center overlay and that OBT overlay, moving those into Chapter 39, where we're retaining the current codes. And then with regard to the special design standard overlays, generally it's going to require some coordination with you, the commissioners, and community stakeholders. Our current plan for those, they fall into one of three categories. So there's three of these we know we just want to keep. The way they're written and what they regulate, they work the way they work, and they're very specific to what they regulate. So the Four Corners Community Overlay, Lake Willis, and West State Road 50, we're proposing just keep those as they are in the code. The overlays to remove, we're proposing to remove the TOD overlays, but not because we don't believe in TOD or want anything to do with it, but because Orange Code will effectively replace these for the better. The standards in Orange Code will basically foster more transit-oriented development as far as the place types that are getting assigned, the transects getting assigned, and that's the standards that go with that. So whereas our current TOD overlay really doesn't have any teeth, so to speak, the Orange Code will effectively replace that. And then the special design overlays to discuss with the commissioner, and it's both in District 1, are the Buena Vista North and the Lake Avalon Rural Settlement. So as is, it would either, we propose to either remove them as they exist or to modify them. Specifically with Buena Vista North, it's one that has some architectural standards and has some landscaping code that in a lot of cases is outdated, or it's just kind of onerous on the applicants to try to meet. We grant a lot of variances, or I should say waivers through the PD processes. So certainly something to look at. There's probably some stuff that's worthwhile keeping, so just kind of looking at that and seeing what's worth keeping, what's maybe worth replacing with what's in Orange Code. And then just the Lake Avalon Rural Settlement is the same. It's if you want to do commercial in that rural settlement, it lays out a process to do so. I don't think anybody successfully rezoned any of that to commercial. So there's certainly some things in there that may be worth rolling over into Orange Code, but just analyzing that. So if there's no other questions on the overlays, I'll turn it over to Olin.
Thank you, Taylor, and good afternoon or good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, Olin Hill Planning Division staff. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to, my part of the presentation is to remind you about what the Live Local Act is all about in the state of Florida and how it applies not only to our existing development program, but more importantly, how it applies or will apply to Vision 2050 and Orange Code and those implications. I'll also be making you aware of some pending updates to the Live Local Act that resulted from Senate Bill 328, and it is we're expecting the governor's signature on that very shortly. Very quickly, in terms of Live Local Act and its requirements today, This is basically a program that is intended to increase affordable housing opportunities within the state. The act was signed by Governor DeSantis in March of last year, and it requires the county or any local jurisdiction to administratively approve a proposed residential or mixed-use project for Live Local on any parcel that is zoned commercial, industrial, or mixed use without a comprehensive plan amendment or rezoning if the following 4 criteria is met, and that includes the project must contain at least 40% affordable units. The project is limited to the highest residential density allowed anywhere else within that jurisdiction. Project height is also limited to whatever is within the highest height within a 1-mile radius of that parcel or property. And finally, the project must satisfy all other applicable land development regulations that would otherwise apply. The purpose of this slide is just to show you the differences between the zoning districts today in Orange Code that are eligible for Live Local versus those that would be eligible in Vision 2050 in Orange Code. As you can see today, we have 4 industrial districts. They're listed on your screen. We have 3 commercial districts and 2 mixed-use districts that are located in the Holden Heights community. I also want to remind you that the board, you adopted the SOPs for Live Local in August of last year. In Orange Code Division 2050, the eligible districts would include 2 industrial districts, they're listed on your screen, and then 7 mixed-use districts, and those are also listed on your screen. The purpose of this slide is basically to focus on the 2 primary standards that Live Local addresses that may otherwise supersede our existing code and comp plan, and this includes density and building height. In terms of density, in our current framework, the maximum allowable density is 50 dwelling units per acre, and in Vision 20 Orange Code, that's increased to 70. Regarding height, again, height is really limited to whatever was the highest building or structure within 1 mile of the proposed Live Local project. In most cases today, that would be, a project would be limited to 35 to 80 feet approximately in height, unless you're around the iDrive area where the height's much higher and in some cases unlimited. In Vision 2050 Orange Code, again, in most places, the maximum building height within that 1 mile would be 3 to 5 stories. Again, the exception would be if you're in iDrive and the tourist activity center to the south, or even certain areas of UCF Regional Center, those heights would be a little higher. All other standards would apply. For whatever transect zone would be applied in Vision 2050 Orange Code, just like we apply today in our current code with the R2, R3, and the mixed-use districts in Holden Heights. Just to show you a map of where Live Local is eligible today, you'll see on your screen those areas in white represent 17,688 acres. Those are all those commercial, mixed-use, and industrial properties that are zoned for that today in the code. And what you see with Orange Code is that increases to 22,000 plus acres, and that's because of the additional mixed-use districts that Orange Code brings to the plan and framework. The important thing is that all of the properties on your screen, whether they're eligible today or will be eligible with Vision 2050, 80% of those properties fall within our targeted sector, and that's exactly where we want this type of activity to be encouraged. Just real quickly on some changes that are pending with Live Local through Senate Bill 328, which again has already been through the House and Senate, is sitting on the governor's desk for his signature. The first change is that it does reduce parking requirements for Live Local projects by 20% when it's within a half mile of a premium transit station. It allows, and this is a clarification, but it does allow market rate and fee simple units in Live Local projects, provided again that 40% are dedicated solely to rentable and affordable uses. It does also clarify that the maximum density and height allowances are based on the base density that our comp plan allows, not any density bonus that would otherwise be applied. But it doesn't preclude a project from receiving or requesting those bonuses. This is also a new change. The language will clarify that Live Local projects would not qualify if they fall within defined airport flight paths or noise contours. The 2 most notable changes as they affect Orange Code Division 2050 is that the changes would preclude the county from limiting a project's floor area ratio, which, as you know, is the enclosed square footage of a building, below 150% of the highest FAR currently allowed in that jurisdiction. Currently, our maximum floor area ratio is 3.0, and in Vision 2050, it's 4.0. So again, 150% higher than that. I'll also point out, too, though, that even if your FARs are really high, you're still going to be limited in height and sometimes volume based on the other performance standards that apply to a project. This is probably a nice change to Live Local, and it addresses the compatibility factor with Live Local projects when they're adjacent to single-family development. Some of the previous fears of Live Local was you might end up with a towering, incompatible Live Local project next to an existing single-family subdivision or development. This change in the law would say that if a project is adjacent on 2 or more sides by parcels that are zoned for single-family homes, and if there are at least 25 contiguous homes in those properties, the project's height will be capped at either 150% of the tallest adjacent building or 3 stories. And we've kind of stress tested this, and that would pretty much limit any Live Local project next to single family to 3 stories, which is exactly what our code would do in Vision 2050 Orange Code. And lastly, it does require local governments to maintain a website with all of our Live Local Act procedures. We're not asking for your direction necessarily on this particular topic. We just want to make you aware of some upcoming tasks, and that includes creating that local website, amending the resolution that you adopted last summer to reflect changes that are coming out of the Senate bill, and then obviously working on a new resolution in the event that Vision 2050 and Orange Code are adopted later this year. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I will turn it over to Alberto for the conclusion.
Thank you, Olin, and good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. In terms of public outreach and activities that staff has been part of since the transmittal of Vision 2050, July of 2023, until the end of 2023, we've been pretty active with briefing you about the timeline and the ongoing adjustments that has taken. We have been working diligently with the zoning division and other participating partners at the staff level to look at the actual mapping exercise that is currently ongoing as well. Not only what was transmitted to the state in terms of future land uses, the map that establishes the place types and the sectors, but also the zoning standards, the new transit zones, and the zoning map, which is currently ongoing. We've been also meeting quite a bit with advisory board members, with sustainability advisory boards, and other ongoing meetings with different organizations at large. And we have been also working with the latest draft of Orange Code and going article by article, commenting on what we have been reviewing and measuring the existing transects with new adjustments that are part of the revision plan right now. So you will be receiving part of that latest draft as part of the upcoming town hall meetings, and comments are still ongoing on those. What has happened since January of 2024 until the end of last month, actually, we have been, Mayor, we did have the opportunity to have a particular station during your open house where we were able to share with the visitors about Vision 2050 and Orange Code. We have also been coordinating with 2 major universities, University of Central Florida at their local urban and regional planning school, and with UF at their local city lab downtown Orlando as well. You recall both of them have been partners in terms of helping with the grad student level stress testing, including some of the Live Local sites that were shared with the U.S. University of Florida City Lab Grad School. We have also met with the Central Florida Association of Environmental Professionals, last couple of months presenting to them the changes in Vision 2050. Urban Lands Institute has been commenting all along since transmittal of Vision 2050 about best practices and keeping up updates with all the initiatives that are already included in both the comprehensive plan and the standards in Orange Code as well. We have met with the Orlando Regional Realtors Association, and we have ongoing activities associated with the Citizens Planners Academy on a monthly basis. We've reached out to just over 500 attendees in all of those areas. We have also concluded the developers industry stakeholder meetings. Those have been very productive. You heard a little bit from Whitney Evers earlier today about some of the specific exercises that took place, but we first introduced the Orange Code structure and processes to the development community and attorney representatives of different stakeholders in the area. We talked about the plan development strategies that Whitney went over earlier today, and we did quite a bit of stress testing, different size at different scales with them, and some of those particular projects and development programs were actually suggested by the group itself. You hopefully have been receiving the bi-monthly newsletters, keeping you up to date in terms of current activities, and the timeline on the right-hand side of the flyer here pretty much keeps an update on current milestones that we're either about to reach or have already been successfully completed at the time of the distribution of these newsletters. We also have, we're starting the town hall meetings. There's a total of 6 town hall meetings, one per Commissioner's District. Starting tomorrow evening is the first one in Commissioner Bonilla's district, starting at 6 p.m. And every week for the next couple of weeks after that, we will have following with Commissioner Uribe and Commissioner Scott. And then the last week, we have 3 of them with Commissioner Moore on April 29th, Commissioner Wilson April 30th, and Commissioner Gomez-Cordero. We finished the series in your district with on May 2nd. And we also have the portal. We're pretty pleased with the result. This will be a very central focused discussion as part of the town hall meetings about how to continue to have access to all the documents that are available, not only Orange Code, the latest draft, a way to continue to comment regarding existing drafted transect zones within the parcels that participants may be interested in. But this is, provides all kinds of different information, including videos and how to navigate through our Gridix platform as well, which is the go-to site to better understand the framework of not only Vision 2050, but Orange Code. In terms of next steps and the direction that we will be asking of you, I just wanted to quickly put in front of you a timeline to kind of convey graphically what we're looking at right now. In terms of this entire process of Vision 2050 and Orange Code adoption, we're looking at the month of September to conduct the 2 required public hearings to adopt Orange Code, and at the last one, the second meeting in September, to adopt concurrently Vision 2050. When we put that in perspective, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, and we have a deadline of applications at the beginning of May next month. The small scale cycle puts this graphic representation of how long it would take for those new applications to go through our current system. And as you can see, it exceeds the timeline of the anticipated adoption of Orange Code and Vision 2050. So these applications would be kind of out of sync, and there may be some unintended results in terms of the old code and new code and policy as well, from old policy to new policy. That is the case with the regular cycle as well. You can see that any application being received by next month going through the entire cycle and review process. They would not be coming back to you for adoption until March of next year, actually. So this is another discussion point that we wanted to bring in front of you and put in perspective the request and the recommendation of a best practice when different municipalities, different local governments are going through holistic change of their current zoning standards or policies in their comprehensive plan. There is the zoning in progress tool that helps quite a bit introduce a temporary pause. And in this particular case, we're requesting perhaps a 6-month temporary pause in order to put in perspective specific amendments that are being submitted to the county, certain types of developments that may provide unintended consequences or are completely out of sync of the vision plan. We would be providing an opportunity to continue to protect environmentally sensitive areas that are, and they are part of the vision plan, and they continue to gravitate towards a point of very high emphasis in that regards, and allow time to engage with applicants to better understand the relationship of their development program in today's current application versus new conditions that Vision 2050 and Orange Code may bring to them. And many of them are very interested in waiting to see and apply once Vision 2050 and Orange Code is adopted. And also this will prevent any unintended consequence regarding long-range planning goals. After this work session today, we have 2 more work sessions. This is a 3-part series, as you heard Ms. Wilson present at the beginning of this work session. The second one will happen May 7th, where we will be bringing the topics of development processes and Orange Code standards and compatibility measures. This is going to be a very important focused work session that will pretty much unveil the articles within Orange Code and discuss different scenarios with stress testing examples of how the new code will be behaving. And the last work session, we will bring the topics of transportation, long-range transportation planning efforts, as well as public schools, OCPS, not only capacity discussions, capacity analysis, and where in the processes the school board will have an opportunity to provide information related to the impacts of those applications, but also the school siting ordinances as we urbanize certain areas in the county as per the framework of Vision 2050, as we guide developments towards the targeted sector. The fact that much more urban school siting standards are going to be necessary for those new types of school types would have to be part of this overall set of standards, and this is in Article 4 of Orange Code. And then environmental updates will be part of that last work session as well. So just in conclusion here, April 9th would be today, the first meeting work session. The second one, as discussed, will be May 7th. We do have the LPA and PCC work session on May 16th, which will be a consolidation of major topics of discussion as presented today. We would have 2 work sessions in front of LPA. The last and third work session, as previously mentioned, would be June 4th, and then the final Orange Code will be available and delivered by our consultants at the middle of July of 2024. And then we go into the adoption time frame, which would be August and September, with LPA and PCC recommendations going in front of this board in the first and second meeting in September. In conclusion, Mayor and Commissioners, we are recommending and seeking for your direction on 3 very specific areas as part of this presentation. The first one is to get your direction to draft the 6-month zoning in progress ordinance or resolution in order to allow time for us to be able to complete the work that is needed and to continue to engage the development community in terms of the new processes and the new standards, and for them to look at that particular option. We also are asking your direction to proceed with the suggested PD approach that was presented by Ms. Everett. And lastly, we would like to get your direction to proceed with the proposed overlay district strategies presented by Taylor Jones. So with that, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, we're here to answer any questions you may have.
There are questions or comments. We'll start with Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to make this really quick because I know that there's a lot to talk about, but we have a lot of things coming up. First of all, very supportive of the 6-month zoning in progress resolution and ordinance. Put it on the calendar. Let's get it done. 2, the special design overlays in District 1, roll them over. Just keep them where they are. I know if somebody says they're antiquated, people that live there don't think it's antiquated. If we need to get together separately, we'll go ahead and do it. But from everything I get, they're like, they're not going to mess with that, are they? And what was the third to ask? Hang on. I was going right down my list here.
Proceed with the plan development approach.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so that one. So I understand, right? We have to figure this out and understand the investor rights. I think any explanation, Whitney, that we can give it anywhere along the way about the PD process as is even helpful for residents, right? So I know our applicants understand, but we have PDs that are sometimes just one lot. And so it is very, very hard for people to understand that a planned development can be just a single small lot, it's single use. So it's just not intuitive, and I think as part of our educational process, continuing to educate what they are existing, as right now, what we're looking at changing and how we can adapt that without affecting property rights. It's just going to be a heavy lift on that, I think, public engagement part of this. But I understand that there has to be more carrot than stick under. It just makes more sense. So I don't know if you needed my feedback any more specifically on that, and I know that we're going to be having these public engagements, but if we want to meet separately on sort of the way that we could approach that as we go out, I think, you saw in District 1, it's going to come up. So if we want to think about how to help inform the public about the balance of those property rights and updating the code to represent our goals right now without removing any rights or threatening any rights, then I'll help coordinate that, because this is all really critical, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it.
Okay. Understood. Thank you, Commissioner.
So I would encourage staff to take Commissioner Wilson up on her offer to get with her in advance. This is an area that is really, really important to her. I know it's important to all of us, but because of the area that she represents, we want to make sure that we do capture the essence of any public input as we kind of come to the final draft. With that, Commissioner Moore.
Thank you for your work on this. I know it's been several years, and I support the direction that you're asking for in these 3 items today. I was also looking for maybe some guidance before the community meetings that you can provide from a communication standpoint, because it seems like our folks should come prepared. They should look at the maps and ask questions, and we want them, I'm assuming you want them to get down to that granular level of what's around them. I've got you coming to my People with Wekiva Springs meeting to talk to them as well. And so I was wondering if you could just give us some guidance of how our citizens and maybe even the development community should come prepared to these meetings.
Yeah, Commissioner. So one of the things that we could do in order to help advertise the participation of constituents of the specific areas of meetings is to create a summary or an outline as to how each one of the town hall meetings is going to be conducted with an introductory presentation, and then we have the specific stations that are going to provide information not only on the vision plan but also on the standards and interactive mapping exercises. Not very different than what you experienced already with Vision 2050, but much more in-depth detail, because now we have Orange Code standards and the transit zones as part of the overall framework. So we certainly can provide that summary for you and for us to continue to advertise, and then perhaps have some tips as to how to have them access the web page and perhaps be able to navigate through and be ready to have an engaged discussion if they find anything within their property or their area of interest that they would like to discuss with staff. So we can do that before the meetings.
So I know it's pretty labor intensive for you. You had maps at one, and then I recall, but you didn't have one of another section, and that upset those particular residents, and then we had to scramble a little bit. Of course, we offered an additional meeting. I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing from people, and I was curious how you would respond to that in a generic way, is the increased densities. They're like, oh, you can go to how many stories? And I don't think they've always thought about, if you don't have these incentives for developers to come in and revitalize blighted areas, then they're not coming. But it was shocking. It was shocking to them. And so maybe you could give some guidance about that as well as the benefit to the person who lives in that community.
Absolutely. We certainly will be ready to discuss that. And I couldn't have put it any better than Mr. Weiss when he answered the question earlier today about the general intent of Vision 2050 about guiding growth to the areas that are suitable, that are providing those services within the targeted sector of the framework. And growth is happening, and that's not going to change. It's just how it's going to take place within between now and 2050. And we certainly will be ready to discuss that with the residents.
And then the two last points. I'm curious if you've gotten together with the school district because their models are based on the development and the densities that already exist, and we're going to be increasing in certain areas. Are they made aware of that? Because if it's a new growing area and you increase density, intensity, that could certainly cause some overcrowding. But if it's an older area where we used to say they've aged out and you've got whole swaths of where there's the residents aren't childbearing age anymore, it wouldn't really matter that much. But certainly this plan should be overlaid with their numbers to see how they're going to handle this extra growth.
Sure. So, Commissioner, as you know already, 41% of the growth within the targeted sector translates to about approximately 37,000 acres of the county. It connects major employment centers through corridors that are going to be very urban, or they are already place typologies that are urban in nature. So how you're connecting those employment centers and the type of developments that happens in those urban corridors, that's the representation of the targeted sector itself. 37,000 acres, approximately 41% of that population growth projected to the year 2027 is what is intended in those particular areas. So the challenge and what we have been working internally is how do you transition from those areas that are expected, they're going to be transformative, they're going to be very different than the character that they are today, changing existing undeveloped or underdeveloped land along those corridors, those centers, converting, adaptively reusing some of the land of strip malls that may be decaying in time to create those places. And we're moving away from the monocentric type of development. It's not only the downtowns of the cities, but it's a polycentric approach where all of these centers will create their own places for people to live, work, play, and learn. And that is, in a nutshell, the formula. The challenge that we collectively continue to stress test and identify is how do you transition from an area that's going to be very dense and intense without disconnecting from the compatibility measures that are embedded both in Vision 2050 and Orange Code to transition into established neighborhoods of 1-story, 2-story, single-family detached.
No, clearly it is, because it has implications on law enforcement, our fire department, when all of a sudden these areas are more dense. So have you been having conversations with all of them so they know where this, obviously it's up to the private sector to build these things, and none of us have a crystal ball to when they'll actually occur. But certainly the maps are there for them to look at, and what you just described, I can picture where those additional densities would be. I want to give one example. I know it's late, but I'm trying to make it quick. That is something that really clicked for me. I wrote a history book on all the schools in Apopka, and I'm real interested in rebuilding downtown. And we've been doing this vision, the zero with the traffic, but also this Vision 2050. And all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, we're trying to have this livable downtown, and I realized we didn't have a school there anymore. They had all moved out. The city hall was the old school. And I'm like, wow, it took a little bit for the light bulb to go on that now if we're going to have this be more urbanized, we're going to have to go back to having a school in this area. And I was able to have a conversation with Superintendent Vasquez about it. But certainly we're going to get into the school siting ordinance, because it wouldn't work today, for that kind of scenario. But Richard French, who I follow pretty closely, and I know you do as well, was talking about these areas. We shouldn't be thinking about them just for our young professionals and our empty nesters, but they should be suitable for families. So as we adopt this, we go through this process. I hope all these other agencies are getting involved so they can, see what they could be facing with these increased densities. And the last comment I have is we haven't talked about the impact to transportation. That's what our meeting was all this morning. We're going to have future meetings. We've committed to really tackling this before 2026. But there are incredible transportation implications from this plan, and we've lacked the capacity to deal with them. And so that would be my one cautionary warning. We're going to have increased density, but if we don't handle the transportation, it could be a problem. All right, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So Alberto, on the meetings, are the municipalities and their planners invited to attend?
They certainly are, Mayor. We continue to have and engage them in the process. As you may or may not know, when we did the future land use map, we included the transition areas into the municipalities just to establish the dialogue about any opportunities that there may be to begin to not to create a very abrupt change between unincorporated Orange County and the municipalities. We do have quarterly meetings with different cities, the city of Orlando included, but we certainly will extend the invitation as part of this new series to make sure that they attend as well.
Yeah, because as Commissioner Moore was talking, the area that she represents, she got a lot of Apopka, and Apopka is doing a lot of growth and annexing, and so I think for the overall character of these areas to be somewhat similar and compatible, we want to be on the same sheet of music with them to the extent we can. All right, Commissioner Bonilla.
I know we're all tired and want to go home, so I'll try to make this quick. My first question is the 6-month zoning in progress, which I agree with. However, I did submit for the LPN amendments. So how does that relate to this?
Not related, Commissioner, regarding the zoning in progress, right? Whatever direction we end up getting from the board, once those amendments are drafted, if you give us direction to draft them, or review what you've already started, I believe you alluded to that yesterday in yesterday's meeting, that would be part of the final adoption of Vision 2050 in September. So I don't think there is a connection there in terms of time.
Okay. So for the fiscal sustainability analysis tool, I know you're all working on getting something together. Will you be able to use whatever that tool is to tell us what Vision 2050 is going to cost us?
So,
Well,
yeah.
it's a fiscal sustainability, so it's a holistic view of the cost of any development, to the county, the taxpayers. But, so I'm just curious of what Vision 2050 will look like fiscally.
So we started the study right now, or an analysis of what other jurisdictions, municipalities have done or used in terms of consultants or specific tools at a national level. We have identified a matrix of in a table as to what works where. We have not completed that effort. It's been purely internalized within the planning division at this stage. We have to coordinate and discuss that at the department level, and interdepartmental conversations are still in the near horizon with transportation planning, of course, and other departments. So before it's ready for showtime or to bring it back to you or to share it with you, and definitely that will happen before June of this year, which is when we bring that transportation-focused dialogue. Hopefully we would have several instances to share that information with the entire board. And John, I don't know if you want to add any additional information to that.
Commissioner, I think there's a challenge with the fact that our current comprehensive plan is really only projects out through 2030. And so it's not like we're comparing our current plan of 2050 to Vision 2050. We're comparing a 2030 plan with Vision 2050. And so, in terms of the cost of doing nothing, I know that was discussed earlier in the context of transportation investments, but I think it's difficult to predict, and I think this is again one of the challenges with our current comprehensive plan. When we amend it dozens of times a year, it's not necessarily a reliable or predictable tool of what the future is going to look like. And so that's part of what Vision 2050 is trying to accomplish, is it's trying to, one, direct the growth, but it's also trying to be more predictable and flexible about how that growth ultimately occurs. And so I think, long story short, there's not a magic number to say growth in 2050 is going to cost this dollar amount in both infrastructure and services. I mean, I think we can answer that at some level relative to transportation needs, but it also relates back to what are your policy objectives? How do you want to accomplish mobility? What does mobility look like in 2050? Is it simply roads? Is it transit?
It's not only that, too. It's, for instance, so with the increase of population, we need sheriffs, we need fire rescue, we need schools. So, there are tools out there where we could just, if it is so predictable, we were predicting for a certain population in certain areas. We should be able to take, let's say, a section of the area of 2050 and what we are planning for it to be, and put in those numbers and see, will we need an extra school? Will we need another fire station? And how many more sheriffs would we need? That sort of thing, to see, and it should be able to also to tell us, okay, you're going to also get a projected, this is your property tax revenues that you'll be getting. So that's what we should be getting out of this.
And I think that some of the questions that you're asking about also relate back.
Depending on the prediction, what we're planning to do. So since it's so predictable, we should be able to get that.
But I think that's also one of the reasons that you do an EAR, which is the evaluation and appraisal report every 7 years, is how is the plan working? Is it accomplishing our objectives? And if we need to pivot, if we need to make changes in the plan, and that could include where we're looking to target, growth or make, financial investments through our long-range plan or other documents. That's what that EAR process is really intended to capture, other than sort of the high-level policy review. So I want to be careful about setting expectations for this summer, because I still think we're very early in the review of fiscal sustainability tools as it relates to forecasting the fiscal impacts of growth as a community versus an individual application, and what we may be able to bring forward, what information we may be able to bring forward this summer versus a more robust methodology to evaluate specific applications, et cetera. So I think certainly we hear you as, to the request and the importance of that information. Some of it's, again, I think where we're at, one focused on not just the vision plan, but the code. there's a lot of work that's still in front of us on that piece. And it just, again, I would be worried about overcommitting to having some magical tool or product available for the board's use in evaluating Vision 2050 by this summer. I don't think that's realistic.
Okay, so definitely I would like to know that some of that information though, like will we need more schools? Because then we could start, like if we're planning for the growth, we should plan for the growth, so
And
it would be nice to know how many, at this point,
100%.
maybe some type of forecast where, okay, maybe in 2030, we'll need to add this many sheriffs. In 2040, it'd be so, and I guess this is my wish list. Huh?
Deputies.
Deputies. So this is I know.
We got one sheriff. We don't need more
I know,
than
it's so
one.
funny. I always do that. I always call them
Deputies.
sheriffs, like, oh, sheriffs.
But Commissioner, to your point, that's one of the conversations we've been
sheriff.
having with transportation planning is not just, changing the 2030 map and saying, okay, that's our 2050 long-range plan. There's got to be new projects and new mobility objectives and performance measures because we are planning infrastructure differently. It's not just 2030. We're looking 20 more years out and with almost 500,000 more people coming into our community. So a different way to plan and manage growth necessitates different investments, both in terms of infrastructure and services. Commissioner Moore, your question about engagement with OCPS, yes, we've been having multiple meetings with OCPS on the school issue. And one of the questions that they've asked, and of course, Vision 2050 is, South I Drive, for example, in an area that's largely been identified as commercial, or tourist commercial, we're now targeting as mixed use, which includes residential. So that's an area where OCPS has not previously planned for schools. And so OCPS is asking, okay, wait, I don't have school plans out there, and they typically do school planning 10, sometimes 15 years out. Well, we're talking 2050, we're talking 25 years out. So OCPS doesn't have plans for schools for 2050 either. So, but one of the things we are looking at, and have been clear in my engagement with OCPS as well, is, we're talking about trying to direct the growth to our established urban areas where we've got infrastructure and services already available to be presumably more efficient with that delivery. And so OCPS has a significant number of schools that are over capacity, but they also have schools that are under capacity. And so what's the alignment between where we're targeting the growth and where they may have available capacity in the existing school system or can reasonably expand in those existing schools. And so that's a challenge that I wanted to kind of push back to OCPS as well, is it's not just about where you don't have schools, because you don't have schools for 2050, but it's about where existing schools are located that can be reasonably expanded or adapted to accommodate additional growth. And the same thing with transportation and, with some of the discussions that have been occurring about the transit investment, again, focused on a lot of corridors and express bus. How does that planned transit concepts align with our projected growth in the context of Vision 2050? Are we seeing, again, an alignment in the transit plan with where the growth is expected to occur because we're targeting our infill, those existing areas? And so that's the part that, again, I think where we suggested and identified that work session in June was because we knew these were ongoing conversations that we wanted to make sure the board was comfortable with.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, which you just got into, is just having, since we're planning these dense spots, we need right-of-way, to plan this mass transit or this transit, or even for a deputy station. Like, what if it gets a deputy sheriff's station? I don't know what it's going to be called now. But let's say it's like so dense that you need just like substations, in other areas. It's so dense now that we need that. Are we going to have space right away? Because if we're zoning everything up or whatever, what are you calling for this automatic zoning? Is there a name for it?
Well, it's an administrative rezoning, but the zoning categories will ultimately be Transnec-based. So those T2, T3, T4s and their subcategories, those will be the zoning names, or categories that today you would relate to commercial or like C1, C2, C3, et cetera.
Okay, so are we going to be able to have, or can we plan to have these areas, these corridors for the mass transit to be able to go into? if it may already be zoned for something else, and then they're like, sorry, we're building a high-rise here, you can't build a subway here. I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like, just kind of planning it alongside each other so that we can build and cover
For the
it.
conversation we had about 50, that they looked at me like I was nuts for bus rapid transit along the most busy corridor that cuts directly east-west through Orlando and has, you know, presumably since the beginning of our growth boom. So, yeah, I think that I understand what you're saying. I don't know where that comes into play, but the idea of having to retrofit that in a way that puts the vision, keeps Vision 20 on track and doesn't put things like a 50 bus rapid transit out to 2040 it's got to be, there has to be some intersection there, common sense. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
so that's-
Commissioner Gomez-Cadera is waiting patiently.
Yeah,
We've been here a long time. Can we
Can I just
move this
read
along?
through the rest of them then, and just because I know it was a long response. So we have we had an application for Undine Road, which is a flooding area. So when some of these target areas also look like they're in areas that have flooded, so that's something that I just want to make sure is being taken into consideration, that we're not like increasing the densities in areas that can't handle it because of flooding. The zoning proposals are not taking specific properties or areas into consideration. So it's been, like, I'd have to go through every single property to see if it's going to be appropriate for that area, which is going to be hard. And I know I talked to staff and they were like, well, everyone has access to the map, but not everyone knows about it. So I would definitely like a county-wide mailer to go out to everyone like we do with the comprehensive plan amendment. We have to send out mailers. Well, this is a county-wide one, so we should be having the same requirement of sending out mailers to everyone as we do with the comp plan amendment. We definitely, we had an issue with the sidewalks, so people are trying to, I've got 2 applications that came in trying to build up to the sidewalk, not allowing for any trees to be able to shade the sidewalk. So, and they were saying that they were going by Vision 2050 standards, which then Olin told me, well, they were taking it out of context. But look, I'm not sure because we don't have Orange Code or whatever, but we really need to make sure that if it's going to be walkable, Vision 2050, we need to make it walkable. We need to have sidewalks that people, multi-use for bikes and pedestrians, and trees for canopy and shade. But we need that right-of-way, so we can't have the buildings all the way up to the street, because then we don't allow for that right-of-way. And also something that I keep forgetting, bus shelters. We need space for bus shelters, too. And so, I don't know how we could probably, instead of doing the countywide just rezoning automatically, consider keeping, people will still have to apply to get theirs changed. That way we still have the community engagement and community meetings. And, that way, even if it's just like maybe 5 years, that way if we had mistakes and there's something like, actually this won't work, we have an opportunity to address it before it's automatically just, county-wide approved. That's some of my concerns, that we may be approving something that we don't know what the consequences are. There isn't going to be that community engagement and review of the Board of County Commissioners. And inclusive zoning, I'm wondering, will this take away our ability to do inclusive zoning, let's say in the future, like another board decides to do inclusive zoning, where if someone's building like a multi-unit complex and the county's like, well, we want 10% of that to be affordable housing, and of course by Florida statutes we also have to give them the money for that, but will this prevent that from being able to happen?
No, Commissioner. So if you look at the code and the correlation table right now, more importantly in Chapter 1 of Vision 2050, you will be able to see a flex density, which is a density bonus for the purpose of exactly what you're saying. Okay. Which is allowing development to take place as long as they certify the development locally with our housing division.
Okay, and I have more specific questions to the Rural East, where I'm hearing that and I'll meet with you separately so I don't take up the board's time, that there are some things in there that's increasing the densities and intensities, even though, we said it would stay the way it is.
And Mayor, may I just respond?
No. Just get with Commissioner Bonilla.
Okay, we'll read that later.
All right, Commissioner Gomez Cordero.
I know, everybody wants to leave, so I understand that. I always go straight to the point. I have to say thank you, Alberto, and the staff for the presentation. One of my questions was, how or what will you be presenting to the town hall, but you already said it. And I would like to have, if you can provide my office, the flyer, and so I want to invite, the HOAs and residents to the town hall meeting. And Alberto, my question is, after September 24th, for the final adoption, and it's adopted, what will happen after that? And you can be brief, and then we can meet, but we can go.
So there is an effective date period that, for Vision 2050 and Orange Code to become the law of the land, Commissioner. So basically the recommendation today in terms of draft going in front of you would be an adoption of the new reorganized comprehensive plan, Vision 2050, and the concurrent Orange Code to carry with it the new zoning districts that have been collated with the Vision plan as well. So we have new zoning districts for the county.
Okay.
To voicing the question of administratively rezoning and refluming Orange County. That will be the case and the recommendation coming in front of you in September.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm in agreement with the staff recommendation that you put it there, the 3 ones. But then you're saying that after the final approval, like, if the board approve it in September 24th, what?
Then the effective date takes place, and then after the effective date, the new vision plan is the new comprehensive plan for Orange County, and Orange Code becomes, the chapter of Orange Code becomes the new land development code for the county.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
All right. I think to my colleagues on the board, I think we need to write an administrative rule that requires all of us to stay to the end.
That's right.
All right. We stand adjourned.